Hi everyone, this is Jonathan Lee, and today I'll be talking about 3D printing, and more specifically, its application in the medical field with the printing of medical devices. If you take a look at the agenda, the first thing we'll be looking at is what is 3D printing, and the differences between additive and subtractive manufacturing. We'll follow that up with a brief history of 3D printing and different types of 3D printing technologies. Next, we'll talk about the pros and cons of 3D printing compared to traditional manufacturing. Then we'll talk about the application of 3D printing in the medical field. In this area, we'll talk about who regulates medical devices that are 3D printed, what types of medical devices are currently being produced using 3D printing, and recent notable medical innovations in 3D printing. We will finish off with a look at some ethical considerations surrounding the 3D printing of medical devices and some questions for reflection on 3D printed medical devices. So what is 3D printing? 3D printing, also known as additive manufacturing, is a process by which a computer uses a digital file as a guide to print a three-dimensional object by laying down material layer by layer. This process is different from subtractive manufacturing, which is performed by cutting material away from a solid block of material. On this page, we can see a nice visual of the two different processes. As you can see on the left, it starts with a block of material that is slowly cut away to form the finished product, where on the right, additive manufacturing is the subsequent laying down of layers until the final product is produced. So let's look at the history of 3D printing technology. In 1981, Japanese inventor Hideo Kodama wrote a paper discussing his discovery of a process which used ultraviolet light to cure photosensitive polymers. In 1984, French inventors Alain Lemaître and Oliver DeWitt filed a patent for a process that they called stereolithography. The patent was subsequently abandoned. In 1984, American inventor Chuck Hull filed a patent for the stereolithography process, also known as SLA. In 1991, the first fused deposit modeling machine was invented. In 1992, 3D, the company founded by Chuck Hull, produced the first SLA machine. In 1992, DTM produced the first selective laser sintering machine. So the main 3D technologies are fused deposition modeling, stereolithography, and digital light processing, selective laser sintering, and its counterpart selective laser melting, which is the same thing, just using a different material, and material jetting. In fused deposition modeling, in this process, a string of solid material called a filament is guided through a heated nozzle which melts the material so it can then be deposited in a specific layered pattern determined by the computer program. As the material is layered, it dries and forms the basis for subsequent printed layers. In stereolithography, in this process, ultraviolet layers are used to draw designs onto the surface of a polymer vat. When the ultraviolet laser hits the polymer, a photochemical process occurs which solidifies the polymer and forms a layer of the final 3D project. Layers upon layers are added until the object is completed. In selective laser sintering, a computer-guided laser is used to melt and fuse together small powdered particles into a final 3D object. Once one layer is fused, the platform is lowered so another layer of fused material can be layered on top. Then we have material jetting. This process is similar to the process of an inkjet printer. 3D printers drop layers of liquid polymer onto a surface. These layers are instantly solidified using ultraviolet light. Layer upon layer of liquid polymer repeatedly jetted onto a surface and dried until the final structure is complete. So what are the pros and cons of 3D printing? Well, for the pros, 3D printing allows for faster prototyping and manufacturing. It can also be cheaper than other methods of manufacturing, as it can require less raw materials. If you looked at the process of subtractive manufacturing, we start with a large block of material which is then cut away to get the final product. All of those extra materials that were cut away are essentially wasted. There may also be more jobs in the future of 3D printing as the technology takes off. What are the cons? There is a limit to the types of materials that can be used in 3D printing. There is also a risk of people using 3D printing to print dangerous or illegal items. If you look here, there is a link to a article from the San Francisco Chronicle, which talked about the latest use of 3D printing for dangerous items with the advent of ghost guns. And being from California, I thought I would bring up that the recent shooting that happened in Northern California in Tehama County was actually done by a person that was not able to purchase or to have guns legally. He actually built a number of the guns that he used in the shooting using 3D printed materials. The other con would be copyright issues and counterfeit items that are produced with 3D printing. So on to 3D printing of medical devices. So who regulates the 3D printing of medical devices? The FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health regulates firms who manufacture or relabel medical devices, including those that are 3D printed. The FDA has 3 classes for medical devices. The higher the class, the more they are regulated. Class 1 devices are exempt from pre-market notification, while Class 2 devices require pre-market notification, while Class 3 devices require pre-market approval. Information regarding 3D printed devices specifically is relatively vague, and as the technology is new. However, in 2016, as can be seen in the link on this page, the FDA issued guidelines or guidance regarding the design, manufacturing, and testing considerations for 3D printed devices. So, what types of 3D medical devices are currently made via 3D printing? They include prosthetics, medical anatomical models, medical surgical equipment, and dental implants and braces, as well as they are currently looking at the 3D printing of pharmaceuticals. So, here are some notable innovations in 3D printing. In 2013, a 3D splint was printed and inserted into a 6-week-old baby's airway to keep it from continuously collapsing. His airway continued to collapse and it continuously stopped him from breathing. So they printed out this 3D splint that they inserted into his airway to keep his airway open. In 2014, a 22-year-old Dutch woman received a 3D printed skull implant. She was suffering from a disease that caused her skull to grow uncontrollably, and they were able to replace her skull, which had since grown to 3 times thicker than a normal skull and was causing medical issues. They replaced it with a 3D printed skull. In 2014, a 12-year-old Chinese cancer patient received a 3D printed vertebra when one of his was removed to remove a cancerous tumor. In 2015, a cancer patient in Spain received a 3D printed sternum and ribs when his were removed to remove a tumor. And you can see the pictures of the skull, the sternum, and ribs, as well as the 3D splint for the 6-week-old baby in the pictures on the right. So what are some ethical concerns with medical 3D printing? The first one would be accessibility. Will this treatment be available to all or only those who can pay additional costs? One example would be a traditional prosthetic covered by insurance versus the cost of a more technologically advanced 3D prosthetic that can be 3D printed by a private company. The next concern is testing and safety. Are 3D printed devices adequately tested to ensure that they are safe before they are used in a human patient? We don't know for sure how some raw materials used in 3D printing will react with cellular tissue or if they will corrode once implanted in a human body. Another ethical concern is human enhancement, and if there is something unethical with playing God with human nature and enhancing humans beyond their normal human capabilities. You can look at enhancement and wonder, well, where should it stop? So what are some legal concerns associated with this technology? First, there is minimal regulation and guidance. How do manufacturers really know what is right and wrong about what they are printing? Another legal issue concerns copyright and trademark issues. If technology is copycatted using 3D printing. Another legal issue is possible legal liability for accidents or future harm caused by inadequately tested products or materials being placed in a human body. We all see the advertisements on late night TV by law firms asking if you were injured by asbestos or some prescription drug or unsafe medical device. The last legal concern is people using the technology to print illegal items like ghost guns previously discussed, or illegal pharmaceuticals. So what are some questions for future discussion? Well, first, how far should 3D printing go? Should it be used for more than just helping medical ailments? What are the ramifications of the technology being used, as discussed earlier, for human enhancement? You can kind of see a correlation along with that and cosmetic surgery, where some people will get cosmetic surgery after cosmetic surgery for purely aesthetic purposes, not medical purposes, and sometimes the technology can be addicting or people are unhappy with the product and then the surgeries just never stop. So, what are some regulations? Another question for future consideration would be, future discussion would be, what are some regulations that the FDA should impose specifically on 3D printed devices that may differ from traditional medical devices? So, should they improve the testing and require more testing or just any testing period on devices that are 3D printed that is similar to their non 3D printed counterparts? Should they be regulated more since the technology is newer and isn't tested, and the raw materials that are used aren't tested? One more question. What can be done to make the technology more affordable so there isn't price gouging? Should something be done? Or should companies be allowed to take advantage of the free market and charge any price that they know they can get? There are some two examples listed below. One was the price raising of the Mylan EpiPen from $100 in 2007 to the price of $608 today. That was something that was in the news recently. Another comes from the example of the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals, Martin Shkreli, who was in the news recently for maliciously raising the cost of HIV treatment drug from $13.50 to $750 a pill, a price hike of more than 5,000%. Obviously, these questions for future discussion surrounding 3D printing are limited, and there are obviously a lot more questions that can be asked out there. But these are just some to spark future discussion. Thank you. Once again, this was Jonathan Lee, and this was my presentation on the 3D printing of medical devices. Thank you.